Hello, and welcome to Story Hour. I'm Kathy Ramsperger, and I'm the author of the award-winning The Shores of Our Souls and 1,000 Flying Things. I'm also a coach who founded Ground One and created Step Into Your Story. I'm here with Kaylee Mullis to connect people, both readers and writers who love books. I concentrate mainly on transformational stories of social justice that focus on the connections and sometimes disconnections between cultures. And today we'd like to welcome novelist James Garrison, author of 3 incredibly well-researched, if not outright lived, noir thrillers. So welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate you having me on your show, and I think you've done a great job. I've watched particularly the last one with Eileen Sanchez and just was impressed with the interview and with her story.
Oh, well, I feel the same way about Eileen. Thank you, Jim. And I feel the same way about your books. I've watched your writing from afar for a while and was really glad that I could connect with you about this. So just a little bit about Jim for the audience. He began writing fiction after 30 years of practicing law. And that shows big time in What Seems True. Jim's first novel, QL4, is based on his experiences as a military cop or an MP in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. And he's also a published writer of short stories, and he's a poet, and I can tell from his poetry he's a nature lover like me. And he spends his time between Houston and Colorado. His Lost on the Staten Island Ferry was nominated for the 2019 Pushcart Prize. And he's also written a poem, Why Did Hemingway Kill Himself? That spoke to me. I have always thought that. Probably spoke to a lot of people. Haley? Yeah, okay. So have you always wanted to write books from the time you, even before your legal briefs?
I've always wanted to write, but I'm not sure a novel was in my mind, although one of the lawyers who worked with me after I published the book said that in a staff meeting, I said one time I was going to write a novel. So, I mean, I don't remember. Of course, there are a lot of things I don't remember saying, and they sometimes come back to haunt me. But
I would think the cases themselves would make any lawyer say that. This has got to be a novel, right?
Right. John Grisham certainly came from that side of the table. But when I decided to write books was when I was, I'd been paid to go away by my oil company employer in a merger. And I had resumes and they gave me some paid time off. And my wife and I did some traveling and I sent out some resumes. And my son said, Dad, why don't you write a book? And he gave me for Christmas, and it was probably about 2001, a book, how to write and market your first novel. So I read that and I thought, I'm going to do that. And much to my wife's chagrin, I never sent out any more resumes.
You were hooked.
Well, I started to do a memoir called Staying Home for the Kids, or My Wife's Worst Nightmare. And because I'd get these questions when we'd go out and I'd be with her. Well, Jim, say, are you going, have you sent out resumes? Because, I wasn't working. And I said, no, I'm staying home for the kids. One's in Germany and one's in Delaware. And I said, just in case they call. And you know what? They did call. And I got some of the questions. But anyway, I tend to go off the
It's
subject.
Absolutely fine. I'm prepared, and I'll interrupt you if need be. And since we're at a natural stopping place, let's go into what inspired you to write QL4, which is your Vietnam novel. And can you tell us a little bit about what QL4 is?
Okay. Well, first, the inspiration, of course, came from my experiences as an MP, which were certainly, to me, out of the ordinary of my experience. And I like to say it was educational in many ways. And I met people I would have never met before. But Vietnam had been sort of a burr under my saddle for years. I didn't read about it. Certainly after the fall of Saigon, it's just like, I don't want to go back there. But I did think about it. And I told, unlike some people, and of course, my experiences weren't as traumatic as certainly a foot soldier's would be. I'm willing to talk about it. And I, in fact, my advice to anybody in a situation like that is you need to talk to somebody. But I found it very cathartic to go back to it. And I actually got interested in Vietnam when I read The Things They Carry by Tim O'Brien and saw a reference to a P-38 can opener, which I still have. And it rang a bell in part because there was a young man who tried to slit his wrist when I was in basic training with P-38 can opener. And of course, he ended back in the field the next day. But those stories resonated with me. And I started, well, the next triggering thing was my son asked me, well, what did you do in the war, Dad? And he asked me, he's an artist. He was at Cooper Union in New York. He had a project. We were at the beach. And he asked something like that. He wanted to do the video. And so I started out and I was mad about something. And when I get angry, I was mad at his sister because of her boyfriend. But I said, I specialized in brains. And, kind of a mean thing. And I just started talking about some of my experiences. I don't even remember what it was. And he doesn't have the video, but he put it to a very calming video he took of the ocean because we were at Myrtle Beach, of the waves coming in and me talking about these events. And that's where I think he got the idea about why don't you write your first novel? The other inspiration on writing a Vietnam novel is I felt the Vietnam vets have been ignored. People just wanted to forget the war. I didn't want to forget it. I know people who were killed there, and I know many people suffered, both Vietnamese and Americans, and I felt like it, I don't want it forgotten. But then when I sat down to write it, the war movies that had been written, I wanted to write a crime novel. And that's what I did. I wrote a crime novel.
You did. And it has so many twists and turns and keeps you going. I think I started reading it because I was just young enough not to be a draft. I mean, I was a woman too at the time, so we couldn't be drafted. But I saw so many brothers going to Vietnam, and my husband's brother served.
Yeah. So
I wanted to read the book because of Vietnam, but I ended up loving it because of everything else it said. It's just one of my favorite books in a very long time. And go ahead.
You asked me also about the meaning of the road.
Yes.
And I've told people that tale, but the QL4, we call Fun Lock 4, was the highway from Saigon down into Canton. It doesn't exist any longer. There is a QL1, I think, that goes all the way. But I love road books. Everything from Huckleberry Finn is a road book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I was thinking in terms of road books. In fact, I went back and reread Huckleberry Finn and John Steinbeck's Troubles with Charlie. Oh, wow. And my wife and I were in France. We got a trip because I went to Saudi Arabia and managed to, and we'd never gone to Europe otherwise. And so we like to travel. And we were driving down these back roads in France, and all of a sudden I see, here are these concrete signposts that are red and white. And they're, like the road B something, and 10 kilometers to San Milo, something like that. And I said, those are in Vietnam. The French, baguettes, we had baguettes, which I talk about, and the French Vietnamese prostitute. The French left a lot behind. And I thought, I actually probably didn't come to this one until later. We Americans, we followed in the footsteps of the French down the same road to the same end. And I don't know if you remember the major who was
Oh, I do.
old experience, and you say, same song, different verse. But anyway, I wanted to
So
get that.
true, and not just in Vietnam. I want to get to your other book just briefly. Can you give us a couple sentences about the second one? Because I don't want to just totally gloss over it, but I want to spend my time on these two books.
Sure. I actually set out to write 4 novels. I resolved to do that before I faded to dark. And the Safecracker was the 3rd novel. The other one is still out there.
Good.
But the Safecracker is I finally said it's a tongue-in-cheek legal thriller based upon my initial experiences of practicing law without knowing what I was doing, being thrown out. And, I did have a Safecracker client, and the Safecracker is this link between high crimes and low crimes, a group of city officials and investors who are going to defraud an alternative energy project that's being built by the city and skim the proceeds off of municipal bonds. I didn't have that experience, but I had background where I was involved in a nuclear power project by cities, and I had ended up representing some appointed clients that gave me some of the experiences I used as a background for that book.
Cool. That sounds really interesting. I'll have to read it next. So what I just finished What Seems True, and you know that well. What inspired you to write it? I know, but I want the audience to hear.
Well, I was a young lawyer in Port Arthur, Texas, working for Texaco. And I, again, was thrown into something I didn't know what I was doing. I'd never wanted to do labor and employment law. And it's almost very soon, I was at one of the facilities, and a Texas Ranger showed up. And the first Black supervisor in this plant had been murdered. He'd been found dead, shot multiple times with a shotgun. And I got involved in the investigation to some extent in the attempts to prosecute the perpetrators, who were 2 of the employees in the facility. And I don't want to give away too much of the plot.
No, that's the whole problem with the second book. It's 3rd book, but the second one we're going to talk about today. Talking about almost anything, because it's so tightly woven, gives something else away. And the perp is revealed quite early. So let's leave it at that for right now. And then we'll delve in a little bit more in a few minutes. I'd really like to talk about your life experience factor in all your books, including your parents. I'm thinking your mother, and the work ethic you were taught. And you've talked about your MP experience and your legal experience, but do you think you were sort of primed for story early? It's in your voice to me. That's just why I'm asking.
Yeah, I think so. And part of it is my father was very reticent, and he was a maintenance employee in the post office, and he had perfect attendance in the 4th grade when he was 13 years old. And then he ran away from home at 16. And so I knew some of those stories. He didn't talk about it a lot. My mother, on the other hand, if she got beyond the 1st grade, she never admitted it. Although I went to dinner with some folks, one of her sisters, and the guy said, well, Gladys, yeah, I think I saw you in the 1st grade. I mean, in the 3rd grade. And my mother goes, oh, I don't think so. But she could tell a story. And I heard, everything from how she met my father. She stood him up, and he told her, if you ever stand me, and a year later to the day, according to her, he asked her for a date again. And she stood him up for the guy who had the car, and he didn't have the car. And so she could tell all these stories. And a lot of times, even when she was in her 80s, she's living by herself. My father died when I was 15. And I'd go to her little house in Statesville, North Carolina, and we'd sit at the table, and she would just get me laughing because she'd tell these stories on herself. But the two of the things that really probably had a big influence was the fact I had rheumatic fever when I was after the 2nd grade. And at that time, the way they treated it is they just gave you tons of penicillin, and I stayed in bed for 2 months. Of course, rheumatic fever was better than having polio, which one of our neighbors had.
Right.
And I would get library books. And my brother, who was 7 years older than me, he would get books on his card. He had books too. And I started reading probably way beyond where I normally would have been, and just got addicted to reading everything. And he'd read a lot of war stories. He's an engineer, professor of engineering, who taught astronauts. He's actually a rocket scientist, I guess. But that was one experience. The other experience was in the 8th grade. I figured school was, not something I was really interested in. And I had a grammar test, 2 grammar tests, and the teacher comes to me and says, James, you got an 18 on one and a 22 on the other. I think you can do better than that. And she said, I'm going to let you take these over. So I took them over, and I read the instructions. And
This time,
I came back, and she said, you got 100 on each. He says, but I can't give you that. I'll give you a B. And that was a lesson to me. First of all, read the instructions, and grammar's important. And then second chances. And when my second book is called The Salvation of Buster Adams, and it was my thinking, I have screwed up so many times, or I could have, and something must be keeping me from doing that. It's, I've got a guardian angel. So I created, well, I'll tell you a little bit when we get to the end.
Okay. Wonderful. And what a great teacher. And what a great mother you had. Was being an MP different or similar to having other assignments in Vietnam? I mean, it was vastly different, wasn't it?
Vastly. And I was so lucky, despite being an MP was like being a city cop where I was here. Okay. Although, I was looking back at some of my letters, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later, I guess. But I mentioned they caught 2 mama signs, which was just the vernacular for the older women, and putting 50 pounds of TNT into a road mine. So I guess they don't really have, well, they caught them, thankfully. But that was the difference for what we had. One of the goals and one of the things I put into QL4 that I wanted to get across is we didn't want to go to the field. I did not want to go out and be with the guys wading through the rice paddies. And if you look at the statistics, proportionally, and I don't know the percentage, but the bulk of the troops in Vietnam were support. And the people actually doing the fighting were a smaller, much smaller percentage.
Wow.
And and one of the things that was an irritant is here, in the milieu of the book is the black market. Here are these support people, civilians, Americans, Vietnamese, and they're making money off of this war. Of course, people back in Washington and Texas and other places were making money too. But no, it was, we lived in if you recall in the book, an old, and I don't know if it's a French hotel, but I called it the MP Villa. And I think we called it that time.
Wow.
And the Seabees, the Viet Cong had come through in 68. Seabees had been there, pushed them out, took the village, took the whole town. In fact, you still see the bullet holes all over the place. And when it was retaken, they put the MPs into this place, which was out miles away from the airport. And I think part of it was intentionally give distance from the troops they were policing, and sandwiched between two Vietnamese units. And there were, it varied in times from anywhere to about 25 of us to 40. And I always felt like we were at the Alamo. I mean, I didn't know the Vietnamese were going to defend us.
That's a really good analogy.
If you look at my webpage, I've got a section with photographs of the villa. And I actually went around with a little brownie camera. It's stuck in my fatigue pockets, and I took pictures of everything. In fact, the cover of the book is taken from where there was a crane accident.
Oh,
and
wow.
the boys sitting on the signpost.
So have you gone back, or would you want to go back?
I do want to go back. I just have never found the right time to go. I would have liked to have gone before I finished the book so I could absorb the differences. But I did a lot of research, and one of the things I do want to mention, this little anecdote, is we had duty at the My Thuan ferry, which I changed it to My Land because I messed with the geography of the area. And we'd go out there, it'd be one MP and everybody else in the world. But the ferry, I took the ferry back and forth across, and I don't know, it looked like a mile across. The Australians came in years later and built a bridge across the river there, the northern part. I thought that's so great. I mean, I don't know why they built it, and I'm sure it was built with aid. But
it's so interesting. I hear it's changed a lot, and I almost got there in the 90s, but I almost got a lot of different places that I didn't get to, but had a friend who worked there. So I think it might be time for the audience to ask some questions.
Yes. Hi, everybody. So today we have a few comments and a question, some of which are from Kathleen Rogers. She says hello to you both. And then she wrote a quoted review of What Seems True. And it says, a savvy tale full of grit and grime and passion, vivid characters, and a male narrator who will appeal to both men and women. And she said she loved your novel, Jim. We also have a comment. So sorry about that. We also have a comment from Noelle Puglisi, and she thanks you for your service, Jim. And there's a question from Kathleen, and she says, Jim, was this the house that your dad built? So your dad built a house. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
He did. I actually have a little story in the Reading Nations magazine with pulpwood queens and timber guys about the house my father built, or why I write. And my father, as I said, had a very eclectic education. He did go to school to be an electrician, but he built a house that I grew up in. And it's a white house with a green roof and a red chimney. And he dug the basement, put up the concrete, cinder block walls, and he had help with the chimney, and some of the folks at the post office, I think he paid a little bit to come help him. But it was stuccoed inside and outside, and in the winter times, this is Piedmont, North Carolina, the walls would sweat and the paint would peel off. So every summer, I think it was, we had to go get whatever paint they had left over at the hardware store, and we sometimes had purple walls. But when he died, I went looking for anything he had written. I was 15. I'm very upset. My mother hadn't worked in 20 years, 20 some years, and she suffered mental issues, Great Depression, and my brother was gone. But I wanted to know, can I find anything? And I didn't. I found maybe a little notepad, and there was a letter that he had written to a shipmate of my Uncle Jim, who went down on a destroyer off Newfoundland. And but that was basically it. And I said, I'm going to create something. And that's one of the reasons I write. But then I started thinking, look what he created. I mean, this house.
That's beautiful. And a little bit more than a house too.
Oh, absolutely.
Family. I'm seeing Tom Sawyer whitewashing that fence.
We did whitewash the house. One time my mother was at my house in Houston and I was painting it, and I had the color that June and I liked, my wife and I liked, and it was sort of a truce. And this is an example of my mother, how she thought. She says, "You're going to make an ass out of that house." It's okay. But I should tell you, I said my mother hadn't worked. Within months after my father died, she got her driver's license, which she never had. She'd never bought groceries, and I would help her. We kept a little ledger of what we spent, and she got her job back. Where she got her job back was with the same guy that she worked for in 1937 or 38, 25 years before. And she always referred to him as Old Man Dillon. And he ran a Dillon, it was a shirt mill, and minimum wage, no benefits. You get off Christmas Day, you work the following Saturday. But it was a job.
Kaylee, is that it for right now?
There's one more comment that just came in, and it's from Eileen Sanchez, and she says she's glad to be here, and hello.
Oh, hello, Eileen. I've ordered your book. Just so impressive, a story about 1969.
It really is.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit. I'm going to skip over that one just for time purposes, because I want to read this part. This is what came in the care package that the MP narrator gets, his first one. A box of Cornelius cigars, chocolate chip cookies, a civilian shirt and pants, and a note telling him family news. More importantly, that he wouldn't receive any more Playboy magazines. Law deemed them bad for the morale of soldiers without women. So it's details like that that just made this so real to me. Did you journal, or was all of this in your memory, or do you was it a bit of research, or all three combined?
It had to be all three. I had a friend who had been an off-and-on girlfriend since high school who saved some of my letters, and she gave them back to me later. I had the photographs that I had. I had some writings from Vietnam, But then I started reading. I read a couple of books from the North Vietnamese perspective. There was I can't remember the name of the novel. I read a book about the African American experience there, and the idea here. Johnson says, or maybe it's Anderson. So here I am in Vietnam fighting for freedom, and I don't even have that back home in Alabama. And I read, I can't remember, a New York Times writer, a book called Vietnam that goes all the way back and through the Vietnam War. Also, I started reading books about the French occupation. There was a terrible famine, rice famine after World War I, and I think it was attributable somewhat to the French extracting everything they could out of the country. But I also had audio tapes that I kept, and I had those put on CD, and I listened to those. And
what do you mean audio tapes? You mean
they were, what do you call them? They're not the cassettes.
right?
It's bigger than that, and they're roll-to-roll tapes.
Oh yeah,
And I would, and
reel to reel. That's what they are.
Reel to reel. And I would sit up in the guard tower while I'm staring around and dictate, letters, those tapes home. And
That's so
so I
cool.
have, and some of them, some are humorous, so, some are complaining. And I have one where I go on a rant about Kent State and Jackson State, which is much less known, in May of 70. And I had actually been involved as an MP confronting a riot. And if you read that, remember that chapter, that's exactly how it happened, right down to how it ended. And this rant was, why did those National Guardsmen, it was bad leadership, bad training, that it should never have happened. But
But it did. So you write home, and you obviously really did write home. And I'm wondering if you have an opinion, and then we'll go on to your wonderful book, other book, What Seems True. I don't think a lot of people talk about war when they come home, and it's my passion that people do talk about war, both for their own mental health, and so people will know what happens. I come from a military family, and it was always the funny stories and never anything else. And I know there were things. Right before my dad died, I said, "Daddy, did you see any dead bodies?" And he was like, "Oh yeah." And that's the worst it ever got. So why do you think that is? And do you think maybe we're opening up an era where people do write about war a little bit more?
I don't know. Some things are too horrible to write about. As I mentioned, I found it cathartic. I did have dreams. It was, I'm going back. Okay. Yeah, every time the dream was, I'm back. This is my third tour. But
Oh boy.
the first time I ever had a panic attack, and I've had some, was in Vietnam. And I don't know if it was when we had the first mortar attack, which was a few weeks after there, which I described that I had, I got my glasses. That's the important thing, because my vision was about 2600 and I put them in my boots every night. But I didn't tie my boots before we headed downstairs, and I'm trying to tie them and I'm shaking so badly that I can't tie them, and I wrap it around and just knot it. Well, I want to talk about that. And the first sergeant really was there shaking. And this guy had seen a lot of bad stuff. But there's a book called Matterhorn by,
Right, I've read that one.
yeah, I can't remember
I can't either.
his name, but it's a terrific book. I read it after I wrote QL4, and I thought, God, the things these people put up with. And I have a friend, he was in that area up in near the DMZ, and it's just like, I don't know. Some people suffer horrors that they can't really bring back up, and we do. Our minds suppress bad things, and I'm sure mine does.
Right.
Except, I visualize. I have an ability to go back and visualize being at the Miquon Ferry. It's just the way my mind.
It shows in the writing. I think that you can always tell when somebody is visualizing when they're writing. It's like a movie, right? How was writing about the Texas Gulf Coast different than writing about the Mekong Delta? They're both true crime thrillers.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a lot of similarities, I'll just say, between the motivations of the characters. So I'd just love for you to speak to that.
Well, the differences, of course, is that the danger was more intense than a more alien culture than the Texas Gulf Coast. Although I found some alien things I'd never had crawfish before. The similarity is I like the people. It's you hear GIs coming back saying, "Oh, they really dislike the Vietnamese." I mean, they're trying to kill them if you're out in the field. But I worked with Vietnamese, and I came across, it's like people everywhere, good guys and bad guys, and we dealt with the underbelly of the Vietnamese society often, but also with just some really upright, decent folks. And then the same thing when I got in, like being in Jefferson County, Texas. I came from small town North Carolina where there were no unions, and at that time, no real manufacturing. And here is this huge refinery, very strong unions, and this conflict between labor and management. And actually in Vietnam, the black-white Vietnamese conflict was much more serious than in the Texas Gulf Coast. I had never dealt with actual working situation, although some of the exposure to some of the guys who really did work in Vietnam gave me that, but it gave me a real appreciation for what the people in the refinery do. I mean, some of those jobs are they're dangerous. And I have a description in there where I'd say, there are this many ways, there's more ways than the mind can conjure as to how you can get killed. And there really are. It's just bizarre. And each one of those was a situation, right down to the guy who got dissolved in a vat of acid.
I'll never forget the first time I saw those refineries on the Jersey Turnpike, because I'd never seen anything like it. Just back then, it was like one after another, after another, after another. And I'm assuming that there were a lot more on the Gulf Coast. I didn't get to Texas until I was in my 20s. But I'm sure it was just, well, it's oil, right? So
The Golden Triangle,
right,
as in black gold.
Right. So your novel is called What Seems True, and I'm wondering how you think knowing whom to trust affects the characters' decisions, and all our decisions for that matter.
Well, Ronald Reagan had a expression he used with detente. he says, trust but verify.
Mm.
And actually, when I practiced law, I had 3 rules for practicing law. Never assume anything, never trust anybody. Consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, and no generalizations worth a damn. The last 2 are, mixed up from somebody, Emerson originally, probably through
Oh,
you.
but it's true. And I brought it to journalism too, which is a whole nother story today. But those are wonderful. So keep going. Sorry.
Well, the characters in What Seems True, the main characters have all lived fairly long, in their 40s, lives where they've had a lot of experience, and they are probably in the trust but verify situation with most people. And the thing that Dan, his trust, Dan Esperson, the protagonist, is, and I tell it from the first person, which I usually don't do, probably from all my crime novel reading, like Raymond Chandler and that sort of thing. And he wants to believe things. You want to trust people. And you do usually go in until you get a signal that maybe you shouldn't. And the thing about the flawed character is that your desires overwhelm either your good intentions or your common sense. I came up
both, right? In this case, both.
Right. But I came up with that little intro that what seems true depends upon where you stand, who you are, and what you want. And sometimes you're wrong. After I finished the book and I was thinking about how to describe it.
I love it. I really do.
And it's, you want to trust people. Now, we just had a guy fix our fence out here, and I'm smart. He's recommended by one of our good friends. And he got about halfway done. He had to come back and finish the rest. And we gave him the whole price because he looked like he needed the money. And we trusted him because our friend said, he never came back. And
that happened with the chimney with us once.
Yeah.
Never did.
Well, we harassed
money again.
We kept after our friend until she got after him, and he shows up. Bad job, but hey.
At least it's done.
Well, I'm not too sure.
It doesn't snow where you are, so you don't have to worry about that. The next hurricane, it'll fall down maybe. Let's talk a little bit about the characters. Let's talk about their names, first of all. Not all their names, I don't think, unless I missed some. Were you having fun? Or I mean, I think I got why each was named what as I read on, but I was also laughing. The gentleman who's murdered is named Billy Graham. Right. So can you talk a little bit about that? Not just Billy Graham, but all the names.
Well, they're all tied in. I may have mentioned I was an English major as well as a history major in college, and I took a Shakespeare course, which I loved, had a great teacher. And the professor loved to talk about the puns that Shakespeare used, many of which go over our heads now. But there was one, Mistress Quicklie, who was the innkeeper in one of the Henrys. Actually, she shows up, I think, in others, but one of Falstaff's friends. And I thought, oh, that's just cool. I like that. And so I started out, and I actually worked with a guy named Bing Crosby.
Wow.
And of course, his name, he was Dean somebody.
I know.
And when I was
Brown, so there were a million of us. So
but you tend, to give, people tend to pick up monikers, like in the Army in particular, which I didn't use enough of the ones that we had. There were the Munchkins, two guys that looked like Munchkins. But right at the beginning, I wanted to signal what I was doing. And I had Dan say to the Ranger, he's Bing Crosby, just like you're Roy Rogers. And I figured too is, I had the QL4, a very bright friend of ours who's published her own book about a Bolshoi ballet guy named Solokiev, kept getting my characters mixed up when she read it. And she said, well, I can't tell some of them apart. Of course, that's always my problem in Army movies, is that they all look alike when you see them on film, and all we use
Wearing
are
the same uniform.
Yeah, all we
Or the
use,
other uniform.
yeah, or last names, which but so I also was, well, okay, this will tag these guys and you're not going to miss Roy the Ranger. And Billy Graham, of course, he was a lay preacher, and he would have picked up a name like that. And in the real crime, yeah, there wasn't, that wasn't the situation.
Right.
And I had another one in there that I don't know if you call it Hank Greenberg, the clean cut Cornell intern. Well, actually, he's not an intern. He's been sent down because he's really an up and coming guy. Hank Greenberg was a famous Jewish baseball player.
The only reason I got that was because my son is like, he's like the baseball trivia one. I mean, he knows everything. Can you talk about the interconnections and interactions, all of them, the good, the bad, and the ugly, affect the outcome of your stories? Because you have a way of almost intuitively, I think, figuring out the character, and maybe it's your legal background, figuring out the character's motivations and having it very quickly cause and effect. It's action, effect, reaction, and I think that's why your writing is tight too. So I'd just love for you to talk about character development and race and gender and the differences and how that drives the story. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I might mention in QL4, there's one thing that I had thought about when I was thinking about this interview, is that one of the fears is like the red badge of courage. Am I going to have shell shock? Am I going to run under fire, have cowardice, which I read a lot of war stories, war novels, fact fiction. And in there, Bell goes from where he's having a panic attack every time something happens until you reach Captain Midnight, and he's calm, knows what he's going to do, and he doesn't have any of those reactions. In What Seems True, Derek Frazier, the refinery manager, was like many of the refinery managers I dealt with. He's a feudal lord. And I start out, and if you can visualize the room where they're all sitting, there's Derek, there's Perry Como and Dan and the assistant manager. And I try to give each of them some quirk. Perry, he has a stutter when he gets upset, and he shuffles his feet under his chair. And the manager has his swagger stick, which is, Dan has trouble figuring out what the heck is this anyway.
Oh.
And there's the poster of George C. Scott on the wall behind him. And I tried to develop the manager over the course of the book as not coming across as a dictator, but actually having sympathy for the people. And when the assistant manager starts using the N-word or talking about Billy Graham negatively or race generally negative, he cuts him off.
Right.
And
right.
then at the end, when they're into the other issues with how the Black employees are going to be treated in the layoff, is that he very readily goes along with a scheme. and I have Dan saying, you know, that he feels like that he and the manager have this totally different experience. You know, the manager's a tank commander in World War II, and yet they orbit different stars, but they're in the same moral universe. And I think that's sort of like some of the things I came across in my corporate career. I felt like I was never asked to do anything unethical. I was supposed to find the way to get from point A to point B legally.
Right.
And you know, there's a little Pinterest post which I'm on about just because it's legal doesn't make it right.
Mhm.
And one of my
Do you think that's what he's doing, the manager? Do you think he's trying to be legal, or do you think he's moral too?
I think he's moral. I think that's the what I was trying to
That's
show.
what I saw, but I just wanted to make sure.
Well,
I hate to interrupt, but I really want to get this part out. I love how you end the novel where nobody is clean, you know,
Yes.
it's like they all have some responsibility in that book. And I just think it's really true to life, gritty like life really is.
I don't like stereotypes, and I try to give each character or show some flaws. You know, Hank Greenberg and Liz Johnson are probably the two of the least flawed characters.
Mhm.
But Liz has her flaws, and
Oh yeah.
she's a tough lady. But this, you know, the sad thing is, and I think this was true in the corporate world, it may still be true, that she was being set up to fail. And she was dealing with the boss who would send her out on a mission and then deny that he ever sent her or that he ever told her to do that. And I worked with some managers like that.
So did I. So you share the belief with me that the past informs the present. That's one of the main reasons I write. That's actually. And how does writing about history and the shadow side of humanity help us maybe gain a little light or even a little hope? Maybe hope's too strong a word because you said you weren't a romantic, but a little light in the shadows.
Well, we hope we don't make the same mistakes twice. It seems like sometimes we do.
Because nobody writes about that. I feel like if we just told our stories, it might help. But keep going.
Well, there's the famous quote, I guess, about you know, those who forget history are condemned to relive it. And I misquote things not infrequently. Thankfully, I've got Wikipedia or Google to look it up. And but looking at the whole march of history, I think the more we know about it and reflect on it. I mean, you look at the 1918 pandemic and it's like, okay, did we learn anything? And some people did. And certainly there's a scientific development where there's a core of people who do pay attention to history and do work to try to find out how to do things better the next time. I think that's probably the, you know, whether they're listened to or not is always the question.
I love that answer. Thank you, Jim. And I've loved the whole interview. So Kaylee, do we have anything else?
Yes, we have a few questions and a few comments. Kathleen asked, Jim, can you tell the story about your mom's reaction when she saw you for the first time after you returned from war?
That's a tough one. I'm not sure I can.
Understood.
It's I can't.
Understandable.
Let me just say though, she threw her pocketbook across the parking lot and ran when she got out of the car. And I don't think I'd ever see her run. I was sitting on my suitcase in the Charlotte airport on December 25th. And I had not told anybody I was coming home. You know, it was like, I don't want to tell anybody until I'm there. In fact, it's sort of a fear. I knew some guys who got killed in the last weeks there, and you hear of people getting killed in the first weeks there and getting killed in the last week, superstition, whatever. But I called my mother at 4 o'clock in the morning from Atlanta. I'm sitting out there on my big suitcase that I'd found somewhere to put presents and everything in. And she comes out of the car and sees me, and just there goes that big black pocketbook across the parking lot. But I did manage to tell it, I guess.
Yeah.
You did. That was wonderful. Thank you for that question, Kathleen. And that's what I'm talking about, the stories that just, oh, I can imagine. And Kathleen knows too what it's like to be the mother of somebody serving. And I absolutely know she loves those names. So characters, right, Kathleen? So anything else, Kaylee?
We just had one more comment from Eileen again. It was when you were talking about those things that were similar to cassette tapes. She said that she did that with her father, but when she went to teach with Louisiana, but she used cassette tapes. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Oh, they're very valuable. I still have them, but I can't listen to them. So I'm glad that I have everything on CD now, or have a lot of stuff.
So I want to ask about your writing schedule, and is it different between Texas and Colorado? And does one place inspire you more than the other? And then I'd love to hear what's next.
Well, I actually get to spend only about 3 weeks in Colorado, and we do so much hiking when we're there that I have to have a crush of something. It seems like my books are always, show off, and I have to do something with them, and I squeeze that in. But at home, it's whenever the inspiration hits me. And generally, I just take legal sheets and I'll handwrite everything, and then I'll type it up and then retype and retype and retype. Usually it's just in the mornings, except when my wife has German class at night, and I do some writing then and have a gin and tonic, and maybe submit things to short stories. I tried to keep a calendar. My wife was an accountant at one point, and she tells me I should make sure that I keep records so I can show my how much time I am writing. But I just, of course, sometimes I'll just think of something and start writing it out. And I've written short stories like that. I'll have something happen and I'll sit down and write it. Or I'll be reading another novel, and it'll make me think, oh, I want to write about that. And I'll make notes, and then I have these notes and little folders or stacked up on the desk.
I've got too many Post-it notes like that.
Ah.
So what is truth for Jim Garrison, and what's next?
What is true? life is a miracle, the universe is a mystery. And just enjoy the ride through the storms and with all the bumps. And I could change that around somewhere.
Oh, I don't think you need to. I thought it was wonderful. So what's next? Are you working on a book, or I know you're marketing What Seems True because it just came out. Are you thinking about another book? Are you going to go back to that book that you set aside?
Well, the Salvation of Buster Adams was about 160,000 words, and it's sci-fi with an alien who sees the world through the mind of this very flawed little boy. And it just needs work. But I have extracted the first part of it and made a novella out of it. And I have about 8 short stories that I'm going to send to, I've sent to an editor at Touchpoint and asked that Touchpoint Press and asked if she thought this is something we could do. I've also have a book of 26 poems, which is probably about half my collection or a little less. And I'd like to see if I could get that published. And then I want to write a Civil War novel. I had 2 great grandfathers who fought for the Confederacy in the Civil War. One was wounded at Fredericksburg. His wife, who was a school teacher, according to family lore, took either mule and wagon or horse and buggy and went from Iredell County, North Carolina to, we think, or I heard, the Battlefield Hospital in winter or in early spring to bring her husband home. He had his kneecap shot off. And I think that would make a good story. I've got characters and notes. And my problem is all the detail. You know, I can't write about that with knowing the clothes, the son goes with her, the son Robert, who was a relative, and he is about 12 or 14 years old, and they meet a little boy who's a runaway slave who's about the same age. But I can't get the research done at this point.
Oh, you will. You just published this one, so you've got time. You've got time. So I always do teabag wisdom, no matter what. And this one says, even a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a first step.
From Mao Zedong. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I have said that.
Well, you've had at least three distinct careers, so it makes sense for you. And I'm loving that you've said it. So thank you so much, Jim. Any final words?
Well, I thank you. I think this is a great program, and I admire the energy you put into it. And I thank Kathleen for her support. She's just been a delight. She and Johnny Bernhardt.
Yeah,
and speaking of the 1,000-mile journey, I think maybe I should do a book called Travels with June.
Or maybe not.
Well, we took
Well, I want to thank June too for her tech help at the beginning, and I think everything's a story, and I think you can tell it, Garrison. So thank you, and viewers, thanks for tuning in. Next month, we're going to be talking to energetic coach and healer Renee Harrow. She's got a book in her too, and I hope she'll talk a little bit about it. It's definitely a memoir, not a novel. hers is a story about survival and positivity and gratitude in the face of a lot of challenge, if not trauma. And you're going to love her just like I do. And if you've always wanted to know more about me, I'm thinking of doing a special next month. You can join me here live every third Thursday, interviewing authors like Jim, like Kathleen, like Eileen, at my Facebook page, interviewing authors right here. You can also find the interviews archived on Facebook and up on YouTube. My YouTube channel is just Kathy Ramsperger, but you could also do Kathy Ramsperger /story hour. You can find out more about Jim and his work at his website, jamesgarrison-author.com. That's right, isn't it? There's a hyphen between Garrison and author. And you can find out more about me at shoresofoursouls.com or ground1coaching.com. And finally, we're very close to Halloween. So I just want to wish everyone a happy, happy Halloween with a spooky book to read. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now. Thank you.
Bye-bye.